Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Catherine Baker, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the UC Student and Policy Center, this beautiful building that was a vision of the University Regents. You're going to hear from our chair today in just a moment. And what a perfect time to come together and talk about California's economy. Right as the May revise has been released, and we know there's some budget hearings going on, and a budget has to be adopted by the middle of the month. And so we're delighted to have you here for a conversation about California's economy, just as that policy making is happening. I want to say a little bit about what today's program will entail. It's going to be terrific. First of all, we're going to have the release of the Anderson Economic Forecast with Jerry Nickelsburg. So you're going to get an update from Jerry first off. That's how we're kicking it off. We'll have a short break, and then we'll go into our first panel of distinguished business leaders from across the business community talking about what's the impact, what's it looking like on the ground in California. We take another short break, get a terrific, beautiful buffet lunch, and come back for a fireside chat with our state treasurer, Fiona Ma, and Melanie Mason. Then we will also have our afternoon panel program closing it out with our financial leaders from inside the legislative building who will talk about what the legislature is doing about it, how this is impacting the budget. Today's program is a good representation of different industries across California and leaders from the legislature and government. Also bipartisan, very important to us, and one that is meant to foster great dialogue, good information, so we can all be better at what we're doing here in the Capital community. And with that, you're going to hear from me plenty today. I'll be introducing different programs. There will be Q&A as part of each program, so you'll definitely have an opportunity for almost open mic. But first, I'd like to introduce to you the chair of the UC Regents for the University of California, Janet Riley. Please welcome her.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much. And first of all, I just have to say, from the University of California, from the Regents, we are so thrilled to have Catherine Baker. She has been unbelievable. So, Catherine, thank you very much for putting on today, and thank you for all of your hard work. It is my pleasure as well to welcome you to the second annual California Economic Futures Forum, part of an amazing public policy series that we have here at the UC Student and Policy Center. As Catherine said, the Regents were very, very involved and interested in this center. And what we really were interested in particular, was to strengthen the relationship between the university and the California policymakers, to help them to come to use some of our wonderful research to help them to solve some of these seemingly intractable problems that we face here in California and in the state and really across the world. And so this coming together and collaboration is really a perfect example of that which we hoped so much for. I know I don't have to tell anyone here that we are living in challenging times. There is a lot of economic uncertainty around us. And so in this period between the governor's May revise and the legislature's budget deadline in June, the need for accurate and really unbiased information is particularly important. And as a proud Bruin myself, for 90 years, I know that the Anderson School has really enhanced UCLA's reputation for excellence. And the Anderson School's economic forecasts have really become sort of the gold standard for the Golden State. So I know this information that you will hear today from Jerry and from our wonderful panelists will really be important and useful information that will be used in the decisions that have to be finalized in the next couple weeks about the state budget. So, of course, UC is more than just a host for this event today. We also have skin in the game in this budget. We rely on state funding, as you know, for our groundbreaking research, for education, for innovation, for teaching, and for providing health care to millions and millions of patients across the state of California. UC is also one of the state's greatest economic engines. We deliver about $84 billion a year to the state's economy, generating about $12 billion in tax revenue every single year. So, of course, very, very important in the state of California, and so we always hope for good budget, lots of money coming into the state as well. So it's in our mutual interest to provide policymakers with the information that they need to craft a responsible and a balanced budget that reflects the values of the people of California. So I just want to say thank you again for being here this morning. I think it looks like a terrific program. Again, thank you to Catherine. And, you know, UC's motto is Fiat Lux, which means let there be light. So let there be light shining this morning on California's economic future. And again, thank you all for being here. And it gives me a great pleasure to introduce my friend and the provost of the University of California, Catherine Newman. Too many Catherines.
Thank you, Janet. You can never have too many Catherines. That's what my mother used to tell me. I, in turn, would like to thank Janet Riley for her extraordinary leadership. You know, being the chair of the Board of Regents is not a simple job. It is a full-time commitment, and she has thrown herself into this and made an enormous difference, helping to build this policy center, but helping to guide us through what I think you all would understand has been some pretty complicated times recently. And her crowning achievement of the last month was to bring us our new president, who I will just mention briefly, J.B. Milliken, who is currently the chancellor of the University of Texas system, which we like to think of as our sort of next twin, if you will, because it's also an enormous educational enterprise. And we're looking forward to welcoming him soon, though we are going to be very sorry to let my colleague Michael Drake go back to the faculty. But this is one of the things the chair of the Board of Regents does best, which is help us with finding the right leaders. This place that she helped to craft, along with many of you who are in the audience, we have a very devoted group of leaders here in the Sacramento area. It's really a lot more than a physical space. So this gives me a little bit of an opportunity to advertise to you what this is going to be. It is really a very bold vision. It is University of California's official policy presence in the state capitol. And as Janet said, it was founded to foster a more robust partnership between the university and policymakers, and to give our students an opportunity to learn the trade of legislation, of policymaking, and give our legislators an opportunity to see the extraordinary talent we have in our student body. Since its launch, with Catherine Baker at the helm, the center has launched a series of impactful events, including most recently a conversation with the Senate President Pro Tem, Mike McGuire, and a major conference featuring Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara. These gatherings have really helped the center create a role for itself as a trusted convening space for dialogue and for collaboration. When the UC launched this center in 2023, our goal was very clear: to create this collaborative hub at the heart of state government. In the coming year, you're going to have an opportunity to see even more wonderful programs, but you're going to see some structural interventions, if you will, as well, or new players here in the center. So, for example, the Goldman School of Public Policy, which is UC Berkeley's extraordinary policy program, will bring a new graduate program to the center this fall, a one-year program in public policy, especially aimed at people who are already working here in Sacramento, but for whom a master's degree in public affairs would be useful. And this will help us create, we hope, thousands of more ambassadors from the university to the policy community. Our undergraduate program, which is the storied heart of the enterprise, will continue to provide UC students with internship opportunities from which they can launch their careers, and many of our policymakers had their origins here in the center, so we're keeping that tradition lively. The California Policy Lab, which is a statewide and system-wide network, principally of economists and public policy researchers, will be moving in the fall, and they will be here to provide, as they do already, extraordinary and highly sophisticated advice based on data analysis from the major agencies here in Sacramento to help our policymakers with some of the dilemmas that they have to resolve. So I'm very excited about their arrival. And finally, but not least by any means, our UC State Government Relations team will move its advocacy team into the building, and so we will have a very diverse population here to help make clear the extraordinary work that we do throughout the university. But today we are here to think about California's economy, and very proud to be co-hosting this discussion of the UCLA Anderson Forecast. The Anderson Forecast is a model of nonpartisan, data-driven analysis, and it has guided economic understanding of California and beyond for more than 70 years. It was founded in 1952 by Professor Robert Williams. The UCLA Anderson Forecast very quickly thereafter built a reputation as one of the nation's most respected and consistently accurate sources of economic insight. It is, as Janet said, the gold standard for economic analysis of California, and as a result, it's become an essential resource for policymakers, for people in the media, for business leaders, and you'll hear from some of them shortly, and for civic institutions. This program is possible only because of the generous financial support of a donor who prefers to be not to be a highlighted personality, but through his philanthropy is leaving an enormously positive mark on both scholarship and public policy. So although we cannot name this donor, we're very grateful to be the beneficiaries of his vision for what this center and what this event can be. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Nickelsburg, the director of the UCLA Anderson Forecast, to walk us through the truth as we know it. Jerry?
Thank you. And the truth as we know it changes every day. And I didn't have time this morning to change the slides for today's news, so we'll try and update as we go along. Let's see, I have a clicker here. And so what I want to talk about is the U.S. and California economy. And starting with just two images, because I think these are the most important things for us to talk about. On the left-hand side, tariffs and trade wars. On the right-hand side is a picture of what happened in the 1950s with mass deportations of mostly Mexican nationals and mostly from California. And that's a picture of that. That was during the Eisenhower administration. The difference between that and what is promised today is that these folks who were getting on the bus, they went back to Mexico, they were given papers as guest workers, they came back to work in California's fields. And none of that is contemplated today. So kind of the point here is that on the left-hand side where we have trade wars, we've never seen trade wars like this before. We had the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930. They were big tariffs. They happened at one point in time. There wasn't any confusion about them. They were just implemented, and they were implemented in a depression. We have mass deportations, but very different from today. And what that means is that we have to infer from pieces of data what policy today is going to be doing, but we don't have kind of long strings of data, right? And so there's a lot more uncertainty. And that uncertainty leads businesses, leads households to defensive behavior, and defensive behavior always means less growth. So let's kind of jump in and talk a bit about tariffs. And I like to distinguish tariffs in three ways or three categories. The first are national security tariffs. So think about rare earth metals, or think about personal protection for medical emergencies. If you remember back in 2020, we had to fly airplanes to Shanghai to pick up masks to bring back because we didn't produce those. Well, if China is going to be an adversary, what you want to do is produce that at home. Those tariffs that are going on will stay on. Right? So those are permanent. And they are to induce production in the U.S. There are penalty tariffs. Penalty tariffs are imposed with the idea that there's unfair trade practices, and they're to kind of equalize them. And you heard the president say that he wanted to do something about runaway production from Hollywood to Canada, with the idea that Canada is subsidizing that production. Canadian taxpayers are lowering costs, and you have to somehow equalize that. You can equalize it with a similar subsidy, which is kind of the only policy tool that we have here in California right now. He's going to try and equalize it with a tariff. How do you put a tariff on a movie? I don't know. So remains to be seen. But those are penalty tariffs. Another kind of penalty tariff is, suppose a factory moves from California to Southeast Asia to a location where they are allowed to pollute a river and not allowed to pollute a river here. And the only reason they're there is because they can lower their cost by polluting the river. Well, then you want to equalize that and not give them the benefit of polluting the river. And so those are a whole set of penalty tariffs. They're not coming off. And so a lot of the tariffs that have been imposed on China are with the idea, correct or not, that there's unfair trade going on. And so their penalty tariffs, they will stay. And then the negotiating tariffs, so think about Mexico, think about Canada, even some of the tariffs on China. So these are on-again, off-again tariffs. And the problem with on-again, off-again tariffs is firms don't know what their future costs are going to be. So how are they going to react? They're going to react by not investing or not investing as much. They're going to react by buying less, by putting off long lead time items. And indeed, we are seeing that already. So even though the tariffs may have a 90-day window before they go back on, or they might not go back on, they have an immediate impact. And if the negotiations kind of break down, you get new tariffs, then they come off another window, this is just extended out. So what is the evidence that we have from who pays the tariff? So we have two instances where tariffs have gone up in the U.S. Kind of in the last 100 years. One was 2018, in the first Trump administration, and the other were those 1930 tariffs. In both cases, economic studies of the pricing showed that the exporter to the U.S. received the same amount in dollars before and after the tariff, which meant that that tariff was 100% tax on the U.S. Some may go to consumers, some may go to producers, but it's a tax on the U.S. economy. And I think the best way to think about that as we try and understand tariffs is here in California we have a sales tax, right? It's on some goods, it's not on other goods, it's not on services. And so it's a tax based on the functionality of the consumption. A tariff is a tax on some goods, but not on others. And it's a tax based on the origin of the good. And we all know that sales taxes are just an addition to the cost of goods that we buy. So these tariffs are definitely an increase in tax on the U.S. economy with all that implies. And then deportations. So we've been promised that we'll have the largest mass deportations ever. That hasn't been defined. Maybe it's more than the 1.3 million per year in the 1950s. But what the Trump administration is finding is it's really hard to do. So we're about up to the number of deportations that happened during the Obama administration, not mass deportations. In fact, the labor force in the sectors that would be most impacted by these deportations has been growing, not shrinking. That you would think that people would stop showing up to work. We see that anecdotally, but not in the aggregate numbers, because it's just very hard to do. Logistically, it's very hard to do. So if these are going to impact, our thinking is that they're going to impact later this year and into next year. And so let's use that and go to the U.S. macro outlook. And by the way, we did this forecast in late February. We're putting together the current forecast. As you can imagine, the old forecast is no good, but that's the one we've got. So I'm going to tell you about our current thinking. And certainly the direction of things is going to be the same, just not the magnitude. So the blue here you see are the actuals, and we just got the most recent GDP numbers, and they were negative, but there seemed to be a mismatch between inventory accumulation and imports, and so we're expecting that to be 0 to slightly positive in future revisions of the GDP numbers. And then in the yellow, you see it dips down. That's the impact of tariffs. It's the impact of deportations, but still positive. We're going to be right down around 0. And it doesn't take much to move from, say, a 0.5 economy to a recession. And with all of this uncertainty, a recession is very possible. And we've issued what we call a recession watch. And the idea behind that is if the deportations, if the tariffs, if the disruption in government, so federal government is not functioning well, if all of those have economic impact at more or less the same time, we've got a recession. Okay? If they're spread out over a long period of time, the strength and the inertia in the U.S. economy should carry us through with very slow growth, but positive growth. And so that's what we have to look at is when are these things really going to hit? And then you see a kind of extraordinary growth as you get out into late 26 and into 27. And that's being driven by all of these new technologies that are being developed, a lot of which is happening here in California, that are being developed that are going to increase productivity. And in particular, when we get labor shortages because of deportations, when we get higher prices because of tariffs, firms are going to look for ways to cut costs. They're going to want to invest in labor-saving equipment and software. That means higher productivity. That means higher growth. So we've got a rough patch here, but then we get new technology pushing economic growth up. Here is our old unemployment picture, and we start down here with very tight labor markets in the 3.4 to 3.6, and then we had too fast. When we had a lot of folks saying labor markets are getting weaker. No, labor markets were normalizing. Full employment seems to be about 4% to 4.3%. The April number is 4.2%. And what we have here is an increase in unemployment. And our next forecast will have that going much higher, probably going to 5 or maybe a little above 5. And that's caused by a couple of things. One is the tariffs have people pulling back on expenditures, so less demand. A second is if you have deportations, those folks aren't in the economy. They're not demanding goods and services, so they don't need, you don't need as many grocery clerks. You don't need as many school teachers, et cetera. And so you get layoffs there. And then the second part of this is complementarity. So there was a program that ran from 2008 to 2014 called Safe Communities. It was a series of communities where deportations happened. And what they found was the unemployment rate went up in each of those. It wasn't that jobs were freed up for local residents, it's that you had complementarities. And the way to think about this is if you're a home builder, and then you have a whole set of different skills. And if one of those skills is, let's say, drywall, and your drywall labor force shrank dramatically because of deportations, then you can't build as many homes. You can't build them as fast. So you need fewer roofers and HVAC and so on, and those folks get unemployed. So we've got the unemployment rate going up, and then as the economy picks up steam later in 2027, the unemployment rate will be coming down. Okay, so this one is hard to read. This is inflation. If we have tariffs, which we do, prices are going up. We're seeing that. They were headed down but now they're headed back up. One has to be a little bit careful of the consumer price index numbers because energy is in the headline numbers, and energy prices have been going down because oil prices are down. Right? But consumer prices are going up. Natural gas prices are going up. And so while inflation rates were coming down towards the Federal Reserve's 2% target, they've now kind of flattened out and they're starting to go up. And what's as important as the existing inflation rates, which is looking backwards at what happened last month, is this, which is inflation expectations. And the Federal Reserve pays attention to inflation expectations. I don't have the latest numbers on here, but this is from the Michigan survey. The blue line is the 1 year ahead expectation of inflation. When we had high inflation back in the COVID and post-COVID times, that blue line is high. But then it comes down, it comes steadily down to the orange line. The orange line is a 5-year expectation of inflation. And that's pretty constant during that period of time. People did not expect that inflation to go on for very long. That's changed now. And the latest is that households are expecting inflation next year to go up to 7%. Okay? The Fed looks at both inflation, actual inflation, and inflation expectations. Because if you think inflation rate is going up to 7%, you advance purchases. That generates a demand which increases prices and generates a demand by labor for higher wages. And you get into a kind of wage price spiral. So this is really concerning to the Fed, which leads to their quandary. The Fed has a dual mandate: price stability and full employment. They lower interest rates when unemployment's going up. They raise interest rates when inflation is going up. What do they do when both are happening? They're kind of stuck, right? The administration wants them to lower interest rates, but the Fed is very conscious of how they're going to be viewed. Did they lower interest rates and start an inflation like the 70s, so we need a Volcker shock to bring it down? I don't think they will do that. I think they're really conscious of that. And during that inflation that we just looked at, back in the 2022, both John Williams, the president of the New York Fed, and Chairman Powell, they both said separately, we must bring inflation down. If it causes a recession, we're willing to accept that. We don't want it, but we're willing to accept it. So if they're still thinking the same way, and they haven't given any indication that they're thinking otherwise, if they're still thinking the same way, then they might not raise interest rates because of the kind of political blowback, but they won't lower them. And so in our forecast, we have, even though financial markets have them lowering interest rates 2 to 3 times, we don't think they're going to do that at all. They're going to say, well, we're data-based, we're not sure yet, it's confusing, uncertainty, we're not going to move. And so interest rates are going to stay pretty much where they're at. And you can see that in the 10-year Treasury that's now hovering around 4.5%. 10-year Treasury is not predicting a lowering of interest rates. And by the way, Wall Street is notoriously bad at forecasting what the Fed's going to do. Okay, so let's turn to California, and let's look at some numbers about California, because there's some worrisome signs here for our state. So in the left-hand picture, these are the GDP growth rates going into 2024, and so it's about 3-4 quarters. On the right-hand side is the U.S., and California is the fastest growing state. Okay? These are the large states, right? It's not North Dakota, where if you have an expansion of oil wells, you get a rapid growth in GDP because it's such a small state. These are the states that actually move the U.S. GDP numbers. You might say that I cherry-picked that. You would be right. But any period you take, in this, since 2000, you're going to find similar kinds of numbers. That gold bar there may be moving a few to the right, but it's still going to be one of the fastest growing states. But here are the worrisome signs. Look on the right-hand side. In 2024, California had really good economic growth, but it was all in the first quarter. It's over 6% in the first quarter, while the U.S. is under 2%. The next 2 quarters, California grows at the same rate as the U.S., and then in the last quarter, it grows much slower than the U.S. So the growth in our state has been going down, and we want to really get into that and see what that means for the future. But that has continued. If you see the April unemployment numbers, the U.S. at 4.2%, California at 5.3%, so 1.1 percentage points higher. And we need to understand that. First of all, is it unusual? And secondly, what's causing it? So is it unusual? This is the historical data on unemployment. The blue line is California and the red is the U.S. And you see there are periods where you get a lot of difference, greater than that 1.1 percentage point difference. And if we look at each of these periods, we go, so this is, let's see, what is that? Is that end of the Vietnam War, end of the Cold War, the housing bubble burst, so California had much more speculative housing going on. And then we've got COVID with stricter than the U.S. Restrictions on travel and business. And then we've got today. So we've got 1.1 percentage points to explain. About 0.3 to 0.4 is because California is an entrepreneurial state. And so if people are starting businesses, some of them are going to fail. People become unemployed. They look for new jobs. And so that's actually kind of a good thing. And so now we've got, say, about 0.8 to explain. To dig into that, let's look at the last year's growth in employment. So we start on the left-hand side. What was driving economic growth last year? It's healthcare and social services. That doesn't have legs, right? We're going to have less funding for that, and there are labor force issues, education, and government. That's really it. And on the right-hand side, we have tech, durable goods manufacturing, non-durable goods manufacturing, which is food processing. We have finance. We have construction. Those all lost jobs in the last year. And if we just annotate this, and I can just quickly do this, these are where tariffs and immigration policy is going to hit. It's pretty much everywhere. One too fast. What that leaves us with is where we don't have serious headwinds in the state of California for next year are durable goods manufacturing, tech, and finance, possibly construction. So we want to look at all of those in some depth. So this next slide, this is manufacturing output in the state of California. And you see it's growing. It was about 24% growth since 2018. It kind of drops off in 2024, and that was a decrease in employment. We had a number of factories in the state that had kind of run their course. Those companies went out of business. The factories closed. We also have factories that are going to be opening all around the state, mostly inland California, but all around the state, including a new steel plant going in, being built today in Mojave, right? So I just want to kind of digress on this. Why is California manufacturing grown? We see in the press lots of bad press about California, and why would a factory locate here? And if you ask CEOs who are building factories here, you get the same answer. I had just an example, a CEO of a company that's building a factory in Orange County, California. Can you think of a higher cost place? Well, we're in California. Of course, you can think of a higher cost place. But there are not many. And I said to him, so that's interesting. There's this place, have you heard of it? It's called Texas. And he said, yes. I said, so why are you building here? And so this is a shameless plug, but it's more than just a plug. It's actually what the data tells us. His answer was, California has such a deep pool of technical talent that if you want to grow, you have to be here. That's our 103 community colleges. That's our extensive Cal State system. That's our research institutes and research universities in my system, the University of California system. That you don't find anywhere else in the world. And that's why we're getting manufacturing, including a company like Scorpios that's moving from Austin to Temecula. Right? If you want to grow, you need the talent. In fact, so also maybe a little known fact, we all heard about everything is leaving California for Austin. That migration is reversed. It's coming from Austin to California. That talent pool just isn't deep enough. And so here, we're really optimistic that durable goods manufacturing is going to be expanding in California, is going to be a growth area. Is it enough to keep us from going negative in 2025 this year? Maybe not, but it does provide kind of superior growth going out in the future. Okay, so let's turn to tech. And we don't really have a tech sector, but we can get a good idea with professional, scientific, and technical services. That's this red line. You see the COVID, and then the growth, and then you see all the layoffs we've heard about as tech firms reorganize. And this is computer design. Similar kinds of pattern. It looks like it's flattened out. And we think this is also a growth area because there's going to be a real demand for labor-saving technology and a real demand for AI. And in fact, when one looks at the venture capital investments over the last few years, almost all of it's coming here. Okay? A little bit to New York, a little bit, and a little bit is a big number, but a little bit to New York, a little bit to Boston. Most of it comes to California. California is getting 17 times the amount that's going to Texas and a larger multiple of the amount that's going to the Southeast. So this is a growth area. The problem here, and this goes back to education, is what is going to be demanded in tech tomorrow as this sector grows is not going to be traditional coding. It's going to be AI-capable people. And that means continuing education to get our workforce up to speed to continue to support growth in this industry. But this is also going to be a growth industry. And then we get to, before I do that, so those two sectors were contracting sectors. And they leave us going from that 0.8 to about 0.5 percentage points in the unemployment rate. And here's the rest of it. This is what's unusual about California today and California's unemployment rate. What you see in the graph here is employment in Hollywood. This is payroll employment in Hollywood. You have to kind of double it about 1.2 times to pick up all the independent contractors. But you see there's growth, and then there's a big spurt of production. And that's production for streaming services. That's why when we turn on our TV, we see all of these shows, more than we can possibly imagine or understand. I look at it and I go, I don't know what to do. And Hollywood definitely has recognized that, right? So they're buying less content is being produced. And how do we know that in the data? In all of the economic studies that have been done of labor actions, what you find is prior to the labor action, whether it's a strike or a lockout, or a threatened strike or lockout, as we saw with our ports last year, what you see is prior to the time when that's going to happen, they're stockpiling. Workers want to work overtime, build up their savings. Firms want to build up their inventories in preparation for the strike. Strike goes on, you get to a point where neither have that stockpile, then they negotiate, the strike ends, they do make up work. So you always see a spike in employment before and a spike afterwards. Look at the gray line there. Doesn't happen. This is very unusual. This suggests that something else was going on, and that's a real contraction in the production of content in Hollywood. Now, some, to be sure, is runaway production, and we've heard a lot about that. But nationwide, we have the same pattern. It's just twice as extreme in California as it is in other parts of the country. Right? And so at least, and by the way, that's a 0.5 percentage point differential between the U.S. and California in unemployment. And so a lot of that's not coming back. Some of it will in countering runaway production, but not all of it. And so those folks are going to end up having to go into other sectors. That takes time. And then just kind of quickly on logistics, we see there the top line are the massive ports of Southern California. And this, again, is stockpiling for the tariffs. And now it's starting to fall off a cliff, right? And this is air cargo. And air cargo is kind of flattened out. Air cargo's on the left, has kind of flattened out. And so what's happening in air cargo is we've run out of capacity. And you know, so for example, from China to the U.S. used to be 300 flights a week. Now they're 83. We know about the flights that have been canceled from Canada. All of that means belly cargo space, that capacity is being taken off the market. And so you can have just less cargo, even if the demand is there. But the worrisome sign is the right-hand side. So the top is airports in Southern California, and the bottom are the airports in Northern California. And this is goods movement. This is by weight. And you notice it's declining in both cases. Right? So we're getting less goods movement, and this is sort of part of this slowdown in economic activity in the state. Now let's turn to housing. Left-hand side, that is sales of existing single-family homes in California. Their depression levels, they're not changing. We boomers are not selling our houses. We're not. We have 3% mortgages. Sorry. And on the right-hand side is home prices. And they've kind of leveled, home prices have kind of leveled out now with higher interest rates and also worries about the economy. But they're still kind of record high. So you would think that with high prices and low inventory, that you'd get a building boom, right? Because builders, they know their price and they know they're going to sell everything that they're going to build, because the largest cohort in California, the largest cohort in the U.S., are 30 to 33-year-olds. Those are the folks that buy their first house. Right? So you would think we'd have a building boom, but if you look at the right-hand side, that's permits. We don't. It's not there. So why isn't it there? Well, high interest rates is part of it. Part of it is, yes, higher prices for homes, but builders today don't know their costs. If you actually look into where building materials come from, lumber from Canada, electrical fittings, and many other things from China, drywall from Mexico, concrete from Mexico. Right? If you don't know what tariffs are going to be applied, you don't know your costs when you're going to go to sell that house, you're not going to build it. And so we haven't had much building. But the other thing, which I think is really important here, and is a policy issue for the state, is on the left-hand side. That's construction, is employment in construction in the building of homes. And if we just draw a line across, except for the speculative building boom, we have more people working there than we ever have before. We've basically run out of construction workers. And you can't build homes if you don't have people to build them. Right? So we have supply constraints, we have uncertainty, we have interest rates, and that's keeping home building down. Now there's some thought that in the soft labor markets, soft construction markets like Phoenix and Las Vegas and Austin, that construction workers will migrate to California, not necessarily with their families, not necessarily move here, but come in temporarily. We've seen that before. We saw it after, for example, the Northridge earthquake, and now we've had the horrific fires in Southern California, so our housing stock has gone down and our building needs have gone up. That could happen. And it's happened in reverse. After Katrina, we saw a migration out of California of construction workers to the Gulf states, right? So we might get some flex in this, but so far we haven't seen it. And furthering the worrying signs, on the left-hand side is enrollment in K-12. We know that's been going down. We know that K-12 schools are closing. If the deportations really take hold, we're going to have fewer kids going to our K-12 schools. Less need for teachers, less need for support personnel. And the right is gig workers. And with gig workers, well, first of all, we're not having as much delivered because now we can be out and with people. And secondly, a number of companies' gig workers are being reclassified as payroll employees, which means payroll taxes and so on. So the cost to the employer has gone up, and they're cutting back on the number of gig workers. So neither of those are growth sectors. So here is kind of the summary. Manufacturing, finance, and tech, we're expecting to recover this year. With agriculture and construction, those are labor force issues. And whether or not the people will be there, to pick the crops, to process the food, to build the homes, that's an unknown. And then the other sectors, they're going to take a while to adjust, including Hollywood. So this is our old forecast. You don't need to pay a lot of attention to that because it's going to be revised. Our new forecast is going to be with employment growth in California slightly negative this year. Right? Not much growth. We just don't see those sectors that are going to drive the California economy in the coming years growing enough to counter these negative winds. And housing, not much new housing being built. We're going to start with replacement housing and some new construction, but at a very low level. And I've talked about risks. And so we have the size and timing of deportations, more extensive tariffs, retaliation, geopolitical, which is now a big risk, and continued disruption in federal government. So lots of uncertainty and a very weak economy, but we do live in California.
Thank you, Jerry. I saw a lot of folks taking notes, photographing your slides, and absorbing some really terrific data, especially when the information about Hollywood jobs came up, because I understand there's tax credits and things happening there. So good stuff. We're going to have a quick presentation from your colleague. We may have time for one or two questions after that. So I'd like to introduce also Ji-Yoon Lee, who is a climate economist at UCLA, and is going to share the wildfire impact on the economy. So we're going to take a few minutes for that. Get your questions ready for her and for Jerry in just a moment. Thank you. You need the microphone.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So today I'm very excited to give a very brief presentation about an ongoing project I'm working on. So the goal of this project is to explore the optimal policy design and incentive design to encourage more homeowners in California to invest more in welfare resilience. So the goal of the project is to pursue a win-win situation where we can enhance welfare resilience while also reducing reliance on the California Fair Plan and attract more customers and homeowners to contract with private insurers. So as you all know, wildfire have caused widespread destruction on property. So the most recent example is like the LA fires that happened in the beginning of this year. So as we see in this figure, so the 2025 LA County fires, the estimate of the destruction cost more than $30 billion. And also we see that in 2018, the Camp Fire in Butte County destroyed more than 18,000 structures and also cost like more than $16 billion. There are also many other wildfires like the Taps Fire, Wuxi Fire, and also the North Complex Fire that destroyed thousands of structures and cost billions of dollars. So this is the scale of the problem. However, California homeowners continue to underinvest in protecting their properties against the rising risk. So in California, there are about 2 million homeowners living in high-risk to extreme risk areas. And in 2008, California implemented a regulation that require homes built after 2008 to adopt the wildfire mitigation strategies. But however, that is only like small percentage of the housing stock in high-risk areas. The majority of the housing stock, like more than 85%, were built before 2008 in the pre-code period. So they need a retrofits. However, the retrofits are not mandated statewide yet. So this is the problem. So because of the rising risk and also underinvestment in mitigation of homeowners, a lot of major insurers like the state farms are leaving California market. So there's a surge in the uninsured and underinsured homeowners relying on the Fair Plan. So the Fair Plan is the state-run program that's which is the last resort insurer. So we can see that in this figure since 2018, the number of homeowners relying on the Fair Plan has doubled from 300,000 to nearly 600,000 homeowners. So in 2025, their like risk exposure on the Fair Plan is about like $600 billion. So if there's a deficit on the Fair Plan, every policyholders in California can be assessed. So this is like the migrating from the private insurer to the public. So because of so California really wants to depopulate the Fair Plan. Since 2022, the California Department of Insurance have implemented the regulation named Safer from Wildfires that require all the insurers, including the Fair Plan, to offer premium discount for wildfire mitigation measures. For example, like vegetation management, fuel modification strategies, home hardening, and the defensive space. So the goal of the discount is to encourage homeowners to invest more in mitigation because their premium is going to be lower. So this can incentivize them to invest more in wildfire resilience. However, the challenge is that the current discount structures are not standardized. So while the insurers are required to provide discount, they are established by each insurer and not standardized. So the discount rate and how they establish the incentive can vary significantly across the insurers. So also the amount is relatively small and not fully differentiated by risk score and mitigation measures, which is important because the benefit of mitigation in high-risk area is much higher than the moderate or low-risk areas. So we do want to offer more discount to homeowners in high-risk area to encourage them to mitigate. So the goal of our project is to explore the optimal policy design and incentive structure to encourage more homeowners to invest in mitigation. So we partner with Mercury insurers to survey 2 different groups of property owners in California. So the first group of people are current policyholders in high-risk area who have not invested enough in mitigation. So the problem is that the insurers might not feel comfortable insuring them in the future and may drop them. So what we want to do is that we want to encourage them to mitigate so they won't lose their insurance later in the future. So the second group of people are homeowners currently on the FAIR plan, so who are seeking coverage from private insurers. These kind of homeowners are kind of underinsured because the FAIR plan doesn't have full coverage like the private insurers. The last group of people we are serving is the uninsured homeowners who have been recently dropped by their private insurers and who are actively seeking new insurance coverage. So we want to figure out, for each of these 3 groups, their preference for purchasing insurers that incentivize them to invest more time and effort to protect their property. And we also want to identify 3 sets of the homeowners because people, they make decisions based on different criteria. People are different. And there are people who don't want to invest regardless of the incentive. There are also people who want to invest regardless of the incentive. So we need to identify different groups of people to design the optimal policy to encourage them. So that being said, giving any discount level, the most effective structure is that we can maximize the probabilities of mitigations and operate for homeowners in the marginal set. That being said, the non-participant set is also very important. We need to identify them to figure out the financial barrier and the behavior barrier. For example, there may be low-income homeowners. They want to mitigate. However, they can't afford it. So we want to identify this group of people so we can treat them differently, like using paired premium discount with loans. So they will change their behavior and they want to mitigate. And there are also another example is that there are homeowners who underestimate the risk. So for this group of people, we want to have a very effective risk communication to change their behavior. And another example is like people are desperate. They don't think they think that their insurer will drop them regardless of their mitigation efforts. So for this group of people, our treatment will be the multi-year contracts. So we provide them with multi-year contract and see if they change their behavior. So later, ultimately, we want to reach a win-win situation, and our funding can inform private insurers, including Mercury Insurance, their strategy to expand their insurance sales across these 3 groups of customers in fire zones, because ultimately the fire plan will not start to shrink until private insurers start to expand their service in risky areas. And also, this is a win-win situation. We also want to promote welfare resilience and encourage more homeowners to invest in mitigation so that we can reduce the overall risk exposure. Thank you.
Thank you. I like a win-win situation. That does feel like the kind that we aim for. Jerry, we have time for one and only one question, because we're going to go into a fantastic panel, and I know you're here a good part of the morning as well. So I see one question. First hand, early bird got the worm. Go for it. And actually, I'll bring the microphone over to you. Yep. All right, quick introduction of who you are.
I'm Kevin Woodruff. I'm retired. Here for my own. Yeah, life is good, largely. This isn't on your slides, but I think it's a question everyone should know the answer to. We just heard recently the statement that California now has the fourth largest economy in the world. Okay, which before we pound ourselves on the back too hard, I'm interested in getting the definition of that and who determines that. Is it measured like on gross domestic product, for example? I assume you can answer. You speak to how that number comes about. Thank you.
That is a great question at the top of mind, given recent news. All right, Jerry, go for it.
Okay, so what does it mean to be the fourth largest economy in the world? The way in which you measure economic activity in a state is the production of goods and services, less retained earnings by corporations. The way you measure GDP on a country is the production of goods and services less that which you import plus that which you export. The methodology is different. And when we're comparing across countries, we have to standardize with some sort of metric. We use the US dollar, but exchange rates fluctuate. So these things are just not comparable. But suffice it to say, California is a very large economy. And it is approximately as large as the largest economies in the world. Those metrics are really hard to work with because they're just different definitions. Where you have the same definitions is when you look across states. And there, California is not only the largest economy in the U.S., it's the largest economy by far. And then you want to look at growth rates, and you remember the chart that I showed you, largest economy by far and outpacing other states. So that's kind of the much more important metric than competing with Germany and the UK and France for size of your economy.
You're sticking around. Big warm thank you to our Jerry Nickelsburg and the Anderson Forecast.